For decades, the story of Polynesia was simple, or so we thought. The first people to set foot on the farthest islands of the Pacific, the Polynesians, were believed to carry two ancient worlds in their veins. The sleek Austronesian lineage from Taiwan and the Philippines, and the rugged Papuan ancestry from New Guinea and Melanesia. A fusion forged before they ever sailed into the vast unknown. But then, a skeleton, buried for 3,000 years, was pulled from the volcanic soil of Vanuatu, and its DNA told a story no one was prepared for. For years, scholars fought over two rival theories: the express train model, an unbroken, lightning-fast migration from Taiwan around 1500 BCE, skipping over populated islands, leaving little time for mixing. And the slowboat model, a meandering journey through Melanesia, centuries of cultural and genetic exchange before reaching Polynesia. Then came 2016. In a groundbreaking study led by Pontus Skoglund of Harvard Medical School, scientists sequenced DNA from 3 Lapita burials in Vanuatu, circa 1200 BCE, and 1 in Tonga, circa 800 BCE. These weren't just bones, they were time capsules from the very dawn of remote Oceania, and the results stunned the scientific world. Not 20% Papuan ancestry, not 10%, but 0. The earliest settlers of these islands, the Lapita pioneers, were genetically indistinguishable from indigenous peoples of Taiwan and the northern Philippines. They had sailed thousands of kilometres, bypassing the coasts of New Guinea and the Solomons entirely, without leaving a trace of local DNA in their blood. Picture it: double-hulled canoes cutting through swells under a canopy of stars. Navigators reading the wind, feeling the pull of invisible currents. Passing entire inhabited archipelagos, not to settle, not to mingle, but to push further, until they reached lands no human eyes had seen. In their graves the signature of their culture lay, red-slipped, dentate-stamped Lapita pottery, identical across thousands of kilometres, marking a single unified expansion. But if the first Polynesians were purely Austronesian, then the question becomes, when and how did the Papuan blood find its way into the beating heart of Polynesia? That answer lay hidden for over 2,000 years, sealed under layers of volcanic ash, in graves where the ocean winds had never disturbed the bones. It would take 2018 and the work of geneticist Mark Lipson and his team to finally open them. 14 ancient genomes, spanning from the very first Lapita settlers of Vanuatu, 1200 BCE, to burials just decades before European ships appeared in these waters. 14 voices from across almost 3 millennia. And what those genomes revealed was a story of erasure. The earliest graves matched the pure Austronesian signature discovered by Pontus Skoglund in 2016. No trace of Papuan ancestry. But by around 300 BCE, something had changed. New skeletons emerged in the record with 80 to 100% Papuan ancestry. The genetic shift was so complete it was as if an entire population had been replaced, the archaeologist agrees. Around this same time, the bright, geometric Lapita pottery vanishes from the islands. In its place, plain, undecorated wares. The elegant long-distance obsidian trade networks, once stretching from the Bismarck archipelago to remote Polynesia, collapse. And in the bones themselves, the skulls grow broader, more robust, traits linked to populations from near Oceania. It was a cultural rupture, but not a linguistic one. Even after this demographic takeover, Vanuatu's languages remained Austronesian. The newcomers, likely from the Bismarck archipelago north of New Guinea, had either adopted the language of the people they displaced, or they had been bilingual long before they arrived. It's a haunting image, the tongue of the vanished Austronesian founders still echoing in the mouths of those who carried none of their blood. But here is the twist that deepens the mystery. This great Papuan wave that swept through Vanuatu was not the source of the Papuan ancestry found in Polynesians today. And if it wasn't these people, then who were the ones who left that genetic fingerprint on Polynesia's bloodline? Because Polynesian Papuan ancestry came from a completely different place. Here's the twist no one saw coming. The Papuan blood in Polynesians did not come from the great wave that overran Vanuatu around approximately 300 BCE. The genetic trail, when followed with the precision of modern genome mapping, veered somewhere else entirely. And the place it led was thousands of kilometres away. Instead of pointing to the Bismarck Archipelago migrants who replaced Vanuatu's founders, the DNA signal inside Polynesians matched populations in the eastern Solomon Islands and Fiji. A completely different corridor of contact. The timeline breaks in two. The Lapita pioneers, pure Austronesian, as proven by Pontus Skoglund's 2016 sequencing, reached Tonga and Samoa by approximately 900 BCE. They plant their pottery, their crops, their culture. Then, for centuries, the genetic record shows no sign of Papuan input. Until it does. As somewhere between 500 BCE and 500 CE, small weathered canoes began slipping into western Polynesia. Not invasion fleets, just a slow drip of voyagers from Fiji and the eastern Solomons, islands where Austronesian and Papuan worlds had already been braided together for generations. The science makes it visible. Polynesian genomes carry Papuan-linked Y chromosome lineages, but maternal lines, the mtDNA, often remain the Austronesian B4A1A1A1 Polynesian motif. That means many of the newcomers were men who married into local Polynesian families, leaving their mark in the paternal line while adopting the language and traditions they found. It's not a conquest story. It's subtler. The kind of integration that reshapes identity quietly over lifetimes, and yet its effect was profound. It altered not only Polynesian genetics, but perhaps their voyaging networks, their tolerance for long expeditions, even the way they interacted with distant shores. This is where the old models collapse. Express train, true for the first wave. Slow boat, true for the second. But this third wave, this uncharted infusion from Fiji and the Eastern Solomons, rewrote Polynesia's genetic script halfway through the journey. And just as this hidden chapter was being woven into Polynesia's story, something even more audacious was happening. Another voyage, another meeting of worlds, one that would connect the far Pacific to an entirely different continent. And while this was unfolding, another Polynesian voyage was rewriting the map of the entire planet. It began with a route, a simple knotted tuber, the kind you could hold in one hand, and yet it would become the smoking gun for one of the boldest expeditions in human history, the sweet potato, native to South America. Yet centuries before Europeans ever crossed the Pacific, it was growing in gardens thousands of kilometres away across the scattered islands of Polynesia. How? For years, scholars argued. Some claimed the plant drifted across the ocean on its own, riding currents for months. Others believed Polynesians themselves brought it back, proof of an impossible voyage. But in 2020, the mystery finally cracked. Alexander Ioannidis and his team conducted one of the largest genetic studies of its kind. 807 Polynesians, 15 Native American groups. And inside their DNA, they found something that had been hiding in plain sight. It wasn't just the plant that crossed the ocean, the people did too. Around AD 1200, Polynesians and indigenous Colombians met and had children together. The genetic signature is undeniable. Half a world apart, yet somehow face to face. The meeting place? The evidence points toward the Marquesas Islands, a rugged volcanic chain at the far eastern edge of Polynesia. Imagine it, canoes arriving heavy with new faces, new languages, carrying the sense of an entirely different world. Or perhaps it happened the other way around. Polynesians landing on the South American coast, trading, feasting, learning, then returning home across waters no other culture had dared to cross. The mind reels at the courage. These were the same navigators who had mapped every atoll, reef, and channel in their ocean. And now they have gone beyond it, following the stars into the blackest nights, riding swells taller than a house, trusting that another shore would rise from the horizon. Their return would bring more than just stories. It brought the sweet potato, a living, growing piece of proof, a root that still grows today, its leaves rustling in the same wind that once filled their sails. But here's the part no one was ready for. Their route through their own ocean may be even more incredible than their trip to another, and it's written in their DNA. The DNA doesn't just whisper who they met, it draws a map. A precise record of every island they stepped on in order, like a trail of footprints across an ocean. In 2021, Alexander Ioannidis and his team pulled this journey out of the genome itself. They traced the subtle shifts in shared ancestry, the tiny differences that appear when a small group breaks away, settles a new island, and becomes the seed for the next voyage. The pattern emerges like falling dominoes. It begins in Samoa, where the descendants of the first Lapita pioneers had lived for nearly 1,000 years. From there, sometime in the 11th century, a fleet turns east. The sails catch the trade winds, the hulls rise over long swells, and the first stop is the Cook Islands. New gardens are planted, stone marae rise, and from here the trail splits again. By the late 11th and early 12th centuries, the Society Islands, Tahiti, Moorea, Huaheine, bloomed into thriving centres. Canoe builders here would become the architects of the next leaps. They send voyagers to the Austral Islands and the long, low coral atolls of the Tuamotu, sometime in the 12th century. Each move is a serial founder event, fewer people, fewer genetic lines, the diversity shrinking with every new horizon. Then comes the Great Push. In the 13th century, crews strike northeast for the Marquesas, volcanic citadels rising straight out of the deep, and southeast for Rapa Nui, Easter Island, the most remote inhabited island on Earth. By the time they arrive, the genetic bottleneck is severe. The genomes tell of small founding populations, sometimes just a handful of families. Yet they carry everything needed to sustain life and culture on the edge of the known world. It's a vision almost impossible to imagine, a string of canoes fanning across the Pacific like a line of toppling dominoes, each fall carrying them farther from home, each landing a point of no return. And yet, while Polynesia was being filled in piece by piece, another branch of the same people was already steering into a route no one saw coming. And they were sailing thousands of kilometres away at the exact same time. It began with two skeletons buried on the island of Guam, their bones resting in the sand for more than 2,000 years. When their DNA was sequenced in 2021 by Irina Pugac and her team, the results landed like a thunderclap. These people, from around 200 BCE were almost genetic twins to the Lapita pioneers of Vanuatu and Tonga. It didn't make sense at first. Guam lies far to the north in the Mariana Islands, thousands of kilometres from the Lapita Trail through Melanesia. How could two such distant populations be so closely related, unless they had left the same homeland at nearly the same time? The genetic clock pointed to a dual-pronged Austronesian expansion between approximately 1500 and 1350 BCE. One arm surged south, skipping past New Guinea into the Bismarck archipelago and on to Vanuatu and Tonga, the Lapita route. The other shot north, straight into Micronesia, settling the Marianas without ever touching the coasts of New Guinea or the Solomon Islands. Both routes bypass the same obstacle, a deliberate avoidance of Papuan settled shores, suggesting direct launches from the Philippines in the earliest stages of the expansion. Picture it, two fleets leaving the same ancestral waters, one riding the southeast trades into the tropical labyrinth of Melanesia, the other veering northeast, riding winds that would take them into open, unbroken ocean. Both carrying the same unblended Austronesian genome, the same star maps burned into memory, the same language families echoing in their speech. And here's where the speculation turns electric. If the northern voyagers of Micronesia held the same genetic roots as the Lapita, could their descendants have later rejoined the expansion, slipping down into Polynesia centuries later? A hidden migration link buried in the genealogies, waiting for ancient DNA to confirm it. Two roots, one people, split by the ocean's compass, and yet perhaps fated to meet again. But the technology that uncovered all this almost never worked in the Pacific at all. For decades, scientists said the Pacific's heat had erased its genetic history. Then they found the one bone that could speak. The petrous bone, the dense stone of the inner ear, holds DNA like a vault. In the tropics, where humidity chews through genetics in weeks, this tiny spiral of bone kept a 3,000-year whisper alive. When researchers opened burials at Teuma in Vanuatu and old graves in Tonga, they didn't chase teeth or ribs. They went straight for the cochlea, the place most likely to remember. To picture the scene: clean rooms glowing white, gowns and gloves, UV-blasted tools. A scientist holds a sliver of petrous bone, mills it into powder, and a cloud of time rises. From that dust they pull fragments so short they're almost broken words. Still, they build libraries, tiny books of ancient code, and they treat the damage with careful enzymes, shaving away the worst of the rot, while leaving just enough scars to prove the DNA is truly old. Those scars, the telltale C-to-T nicks at the ends of molecules, are the passport stamps of antiquity. Between 2016 and 2021, labs used targeted capture to fish out approximately 1.2 million SNPs. The signal points across the genome that let you track ancestry like stars across a night sky. Illumina machines read the letters by the tens of millions. The data goes through fire, mapping to the human reference, checking for contamination on the mitochondrial genome, using X chromosome tests in males, cross-checking radiocarbon dates from bone collagen, even correcting for the marine reservoir where needed. When the numbers finally settle, a face steps out. That's how 2016 revealed the first Lapita voyages in Vanuatu, 1200 BCE, and Tonga, 800 BCE, carried virtually 0% Papuan ancestry. A clean Austronesian line from Taiwan and the Philippines. That's how 2018 read 14 ancient Vanuatu genomes, 1200 BCE to 1800 CE. and saw the Great Turn by approximately 300 BCE. People with 80 to 100% Papuan ancestry arrive, pottery styles vanish, skull shapes shift, trade routes dim, bones speaking, code confirming. Grain by grain, the dead began to talk, not in legend, but in sequence, in dates, in routes that could be drawn on a map and sailed again with your eyes closed. And every time a new petrous bone breaks the silence, another island lights up, another line connects, another assumption fails, and with each genome, the Pacific's map is being redrawn. But it's far from finished, because the most important journeys in this story may be the ones we haven't discovered yet. Here's the shock no one expects. The places that could hold the biggest secrets of Pacific history, Fiji, the Solomon Islands, and the first wave of East Polynesia, are completely silent in the ancient DNA record. Not a single confirmed genome from their earliest settlers. Nothing from the first canoes that touched Tahiti or the Marquesas or Rapa Nui. Entire chapters missing. Why does this matter? Because these aren't just dots on a map. These are the turning points, the launch pads, where migrations collided, merged and transformed. Without their DNA, we're guessing at some of the most critical moments in human expansion. And here's the mind-bender. Those missing genomes could reveal events we've never even imagined. What if Fiji's oldest burial showed traces of a second Austronesian wave? Not from the south, but from the north, linking back to Micronesia's forgotten armada. What if the Solomon Islands turned up a skeleton from 2,000 years ago that wasn't Austronesian at all, but belonged to a different population entirely, a branch of humanity erased from living memory? And what if early East Polynesians carried ancestry from somewhere nowhere near the Pacific? Proof of a transoceanic contact that predates all known voyages. The problem is brutal. The Pacific's climate is a bone killer. Heat, humidity and acidic soils erase DNA in decades. Finding a preserved petrous bone here is like finding gold in a storm drain. It can happen, but only if the burial was sealed away from time and weather. That's why every excavation in these regions is like rolling dice against history. Somewhere, under layers of volcanic ash in Fiji, deep in a cave on Malaita, or beneath a sacred stone platform in the Marquesas, the right skeleton may be waiting. And if we find it, it won't just fill the map. It could shatter it. It could reveal a voyage so vast, so unexpected, that every Pacific migration theory we've ever built would have to be rewritten from the ground up. And that means the greatest Pacific voyage may still be waiting to be told. Every cell in a Pacific Islander carries the memory of 1,000 voyages, not one journey, not one migration, 1,000. In the twist and coil of DNA, the Pacific is not an empty void, it's a highway. And every road on it was carved by human hands, human will, human daring. The Austronesian core runs deep, a genetic spine stretching back over 4,000 years, from Taiwan's misted green hills to the reef-bright shores of the Philippines. But layered into that spine are the Papuan threads, arriving in waves, some early, some centuries later, each one reshaping the face of the Pacific without ever erasing the pulse of its beginnings. And then there's the improbable, almost impossible strand, Native American ancestry, hidden in Polynesian genomes for over 8 centuries. A whisper of contact across the largest ocean on Earth, proof that the canoes did not just cross the Pacific. They reached another continent, met its people, and carried their blood back home. This ocean, so vast it covers 1/3 of the planet, was never a wall. It was a living corridor. Canoes moved along it like blood through veins, carrying languages, plants, tools, and the very code of life between islands that seemed, to the rest of the world, impossibly far apart. But here's the truth that unsettles everything. The same DNA that tells you where your ancestors came from cannot tell you where you belong. Because identity isn't just written in molecules. It's in the words you speak, the winds you read, the land your feet remember. And when your bloodline has crossed oceans before you were even born, how do you choose which shore is truly yours? The map is still unfinished, the voyages are still being traced, and the questions, the real questions, are only just beginning. Next time, we follow a genetic trail that leads under the ice.